Imagine you are, standing in front of a heavy canvas.
Right.
You have a brush in your hand, and you're just staring down this flower you've been trying to paint for, well, for hours.
We've all been there.
Exactly. And the proportions are mathematically accurate. The curves of the petals, they mimic nature perfectly. You have the shadows mapped out.
Yeah.
But then you take a few steps back to look at the whole picture, and the illusion just shatters.
It falls flat.
Completely flat. It looks like, I don't know, colored mud just sitting on top of a woven fabric. And the ultimate challenge for you as a painter is figuring out how to actually ignite that canvas. How do you make that flower look as if light is, physically radiating from inside the petals?
Yeah, transitioning from an image that merely occupies physical space to an image that actually breathes. That is the absolute highest hurdle in painting. It's what separates just an illustration from a living atmosphere.
Which perfectly frames our mission for today's deep dive. We are going to unpack the incredible techniques of acrylic glazing, or veladuras. We are exploring how to construct a masterpiece, not by, just covering a canvas with paint, but by building invisible windows of color.
Right, optical mixing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And fair warning, the level of optical engineering required here, it demands just unrelenting patience.
Oh, a level of patience that honestly conflicts entirely with human nature.
Yeah.
Which leads us straight into the most common trap for anyone, picking up a brush for the first time. The instinct for a beginner who's looking for vibrant, glowing color is to simply grab the most radioactive, bright tube of paint they own and just apply it in these heavy, thick, opaque layers.
Just slap it right on there.
Exactly. Or they attempt to physically mix every single complex shadow and highlight together on a wooden palette, hoping to, find that absolute perfect shade before the brush ever even touches the canvas.
I have absolutely done that. You mix a beautiful yellow with a rich purple, hoping for this deep sunset shadow, and you just end up with this chalky, lifeless gray mud. It is so frustrating.
What's fascinating here is that the corrective principle to that mud, the actual secret to luminosity, it requires a complete paradigm shift.
Okay, how so?
Well, true vibrance does not come from heavy application. It does not come from forcing a bright pigment onto a surface. True luminosity is achieved through extreme transparency and the progressive accumulation of optical layers.
Wow, okay. So, to really wrap our heads around how this physical trick is achieved, we need to look at the professional method. When we examine the meticulous method of Laura Palacios, she doesn't actually begin the painting process with a single drop of color.
No, she doesn't. She completely isolates the problem of light from the problem of color.
Right, she builds the grisaille first. And for anyone unfamiliar, a grisaille is basically a monochromatic underpainting. It's executed entirely in black, white, and varying shades of gray.
It's an architectural blueprint, essentially.
Exactly. She sculpts the volume, she defines the deepest crevices of the petals, and establishes the glaring highlights without the cognitive distraction of, dealing with reds or yellows. It's just a stark gray flower sitting in a gray void.
And the structural integrity of that gray foundation is paramount. It must be bone dry and chemically stabilized before she even considers altering the temperature of the piece. So to wake this gray flower up, La Gran Artista applies a layer of yellow so unimaginably thin and translucent that it barely registers as a physical substance.
Right.
This single whispered layer is designed to just infuse the cold grisaille with a structural internal warmth.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if the goal is just to apply an incredibly thin, whisper-like wash of color over a dried painting, my brain immediately goes to cooking.
Oh, okay. Like making a sauce.
Yeah, exactly. If I have a heavy, dense sauce and I need to thin it out, I just drown it in water.
Right.
So logically, a painter should just take that yellow acrylic, blast it with a cup of water, and just brush it on.
Well, that instinct makes logical sense, but in the realm of acrylic chemistry, it is incredibly dangerous.
Really? Why?
Because if you flood an acrylic pigment with pure water, you are actively destroying the chemical binder. Acrylic paint is essentially microscopic colored rocks, the pigment suspended in a liquid plastic polymer.
Oh, I see.
Right, so water dilutes that plastic glue so severely that when the water finally evaporates, the pigment is just left stranded. It creates this chalky, weak surface that aggressively melts into and actually damages the lower layers. You completely lose structural control.
Oh, wow. So if water destroys the chemical bond, there has to be a vehicle that thins the paint visually without breaking it down physically.
Yes. The essential vehicle here is acrylic medium. Instead of water, the pigment is diluted with this medium, which is basically the paint's invisible glue, just without the colored pigment added in.
So it's just clear paint.
Exactly. It acts as a structural bridge. It gives that highly transparent yellow glaze body and elasticity. You're stretching the color particles far apart from each other, allowing light to pass through, but you are binding them in a solid, resilient plastic matrix.
That makes perfect sense. So it maintains its physical armor while becoming visually invisible,
Oh.
and it adheres to the grisaille without melting the dried gray paint beneath it.
Precisely. This preserves the optical structure of every single transparency. But, this chemical reality introduces the absolute most agonizing rule of the entire process. Because you are building a solid matrix of polymer, every single layer must cure completely.
Like rigorously fundamentally dry.
Yes, absolutely dry.
Because, I mean, if she were to get impatient and apply a heavy wet layer over a slightly damp glaze, it would instantly assassinate the atmospheric depth.
It would ruin it. The colors would physically mix into that chalky mud we talked about earlier. The painting relies entirely on its ability to breathe visually through the stacked layers.
The discipline is just staggering.
Yeah.
She is wrapping the subject in a subtle organic yellow glow purely through extreme restraint.
Yeah.
But, a glowing flower floating in an empty gray void isn't a finished piece. Once that warm internal architecture is locked in, the environment has to react to it. We need to carve out a genuinely three-dimensional atmosphere around the subject, which means pushing the background miles away from the
Yeah,
viewer.
right. And to manipulate that sense of space, the maestra introduces light English green. She focuses this application strictly on the negative space, the background of the composition,
Yeah.
working meticulously from the brightest ambient values right down into the deeper shadows.
And the technical control here is what really caught my eye. We just established that water is dangerous for the paint's integrity, but she doesn't abandon it completely. She actually plays a very delicate balancing act, altering her ratio of water to acrylic medium dynamically, depending entirely on the specific visual edge she needs in that exact millimeter of canvas.
It is a brilliant display of material fluency. When she requires the background to feel ethereal, atmospheric, and slightly out of focus, she introduces a measured amount of water.
Ah, okay.
Right? The water breaks the tension just enough to allow for a delicate, hazy blurring at the edges. But the moment she needs absolute razor-sharp precision in a glaze, perhaps defining the crisp edge of a leaf against the distant background, she eliminates the water and relies heavily on the structural medium.
It's like switching between a soft focus lens and a macro lens on a camera just by tweaking the chemistry on her brush.
That's a great way to put it.
And managing all these different drying times between the water-heavy layers and the medium-heavy layers brings up a wonderful, almost comedic, practical detail in the workflow of Groupe Rime.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Between these highly sophisticated museum-quality applications of polymer chemistry, she uses a standard household hairdryer.
I absolutely love that detail. It really strips away the pretension of the artist's studio.
It proves that maintaining momentum is just as important as the chemistry. The sheer volume of layers required to build chromatic complexity would take years if she waited for natural air drying. The hairdryer accelerates the evaporation without disturbing the delicate polymer bonds.
And that simple tool highlights a profound reality about how we perceive effort in visual art. When we look at a deeply intense, vibrant painting, we often assume the artist used aggressive, passionate brushstrokes,
Right, like physically forcing thick paint onto the canvas.
Exactly. But the intensity here is born of the exact opposite behavior. The richness is a product of progressive, gentle optical accumulation.
And to really test the limits of that accumulation, the environment needs more than just a light green haze. To push the depth to the absolute maximum, La Gran Artista introduces a much darker, almost aggressively cold green, phthalo green, or verde de talo.
This is a total masterstroke of visual logic. She is tapping directly into the physics of color temperature and human biology. Cold colors, particularly dark blues and cool greens, they have shorter light wavelength. So in our everyday visual experience, atmospheric scattering causes distant objects, like a mountain range on the horizon, to appear cool and bluish. Because of this, the human retina is basically hardwired to perceive cold colors as receding into the distance.
While warm colors, like that initial glowing yellow we put in the center of the flower, do the exact opposite. Long wavelengths pull forward, demanding immediate attention.
Precisely. By deliberately flooding the background with this deep, cold phthalo green, she is hacking the viewer's brain. She is visually expanding the distance your eye has to travel to reach the back of the canvas, literally carving out physical miles of space on a two-dimensional plane.
Here's where it gets really interesting. My brain immediately maps this entire process onto music production. It is the exact same philosophy.
Oh, really? In what sense?
Think about a novice sitting down at a mixing board. They have a vocal track, a bass line, a drum beat, and a piano. Their instinct is to mash all the audio signals onto one or two tracks. They physically combine the sound waves before they even leave the speaker, and the result is an incoherent, muddy wall of noise. That is the equivalent of the beginner mixing 5 paints on their wooden palette.
Right, because the physical collision destroys the clarity of the individual components.
Exactly. But a master audio engineer uses multi-track recording. They isolate the vocals on one crystal clear track. The bass gets its own dedicated channel. The piano gets another. They hit play, and those distinct tracks are layered simultaneously.
Ah, I see.
The sounds never actually touch each other inside the computer. They combine in the physical air of the room, and ultimately they mix inside your ear. You hear a complex harmony, but you can still perceive every individual instrument.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that analogy perfectly isolates the magic of this technique. In the methodical practice of Laura Palacios, these incredibly complex, vibrating colors are never actually mixed into a new substance on her wooden palette.
They are remaining completely isolated on their own transparent tracks, which means the only place these colors are actually mixing is inside the viewer's own head.
They are mixing inside your retina. Light enters the room, travels through the cold green layer, passes through the warm yellow layer, hits the stark white and gray grisaille at the very bottom, and bounces back like a mirror.
Wow.
And as that light wave travels back out, it picks up the wavelengths of every transparent layer it passes through. Your retina receives all that fragmented data at once and synthesizes it into a completely new, incredibly deep color.
The canvas isn't a surface. It's a biological machine designed to manipulate light waves before they hit my optic nerve.
A machine that produces an atmospheric depth that is completely impossible to replicate with traditional, opaque, direct painting.
That is just wild. So while the background is pulling our eye miles into the distance with those cold greens, the subject itself needs to hold its ground in the foreground. This brings us to the climax of the color application. This is where La Gran Artista introduces pure magenta to the petals of the flower.
And the operative word there is pure. This specific pigment is applied completely unadulterated. She refuses to temper it with white or darken it with black.
But wait, if she's building complexity, why insist on such strict purity for the magenta?
Because mixing a pigment physically introduces foreign particles that disrupt the transmission of light. If she added white to make it a lighter pink, the opaque titanium particles in the white paint would act like, well, microscopic boulders.
Blocking the light from reaching the yellow layers underneath.
Exactly. By keeping the magenta pure and heavily diluting it with the acrylic medium, she preserves its raw vibrational power. When it's layered delicately over the warm yellow grisaille, the magenta doesn't look like it was painted onto the canvas. It appears to be a natural heat emerging from the core of the flower.
The flower is practically generating its own thermal energy.
Yeah.
But, a painting without contrast is just a glowing blur. To anchor that blinding magenta, we see the introduction of one final, crucial color, Prussian blue.
Yes, and historically, Prussian blue is a fascinating pigment. Discovered essentially by accident in the early 18th century, it was one of the first modern synthetic pigments. It is a deeply rich, cavernous blue with profound violet undertones.
Sounds intense.
It is. It possesses an almost terrifying tinting strength. It can easily overpower a painting if not handled with immense respect.
And just like the greens, she domesticates this powerful blue by highly diluting it with the acrylic medium, stretching its particles across the canvas.
The maestra often compares the effect of acrylic medium combined with a pigment like Prussian blue to architectural stained glass.
Oh, right, like standing inside a cathedral.
Exactly. Think about the physics of a stained glass window. The glass itself is entirely transparent. You can see the world through it, yet it holds a deeply profound, heavy color. It filters the sun without blocking it.
So the acrylic polymer transforms the Prussian blue pigment into liquid glass.
Precisely.
The visual impact of placing that liquid glass onto the canvas is staggering. When these cool, transparent Prussian blues are glazed directly next to or slightly overlapping the warm magenta and yellow tones, they create these violent, beautiful contrasts. And where they overlap, they create these incredibly sophisticated neutralizations.
Right, and they neutralize without ever losing their chromatic dignity. They don't turn into a dead gray paste, they optically vibrate against each other.
The depth at this stage must be completely enveloping. But looking at the final steps of the process, there is this terrifying final stage, the final polish. You have just spent countless hours engineering this incredibly delicate optical machine and of dozens of microscopic transparent layers. Now, you have to reinforce the extreme highlights to make the image pop. The danger of ruining the entire painting right at the finish line feels massive.
Oh, it is absolutely the most precarious moment of the entire endeavor. I mean, how do you apply a final blazing highlight without it looking like you just carelessly dabbed white correction fluid over a beautiful pane of stained glass?
You would instantly shatter the illusion of depth. The white would just sit on the very top, totally disconnected from the internal glow.
The solution lies in respecting the architecture of the painting. The brilliance of her method is that she does not hunt for new places to add light at the end of the process. She strictly, rigidly honors the roadmap she created on day one.
She goes all the way back to the grisaille.
Yes. The final extreme lights are only applied in the exact focal points that were mapped out in that initial gray and white underpainting before a single drop of yellow or green ever touched the canvas. She trusts her original plan.
And the chemical formula for that final highlight shows an obsessive attention to detail. She doesn't just squeeze pure, freezing cold titanium white out of the tube. She engineers a warm white by taking the titanium white and contaminating it with just a microscopic fraction of ochre.
That tiny injection of earthy warmth ensures that the final highlight feels biologically native to the glowing flower, rather than artificial, harsh, and pasted on.
The ultimate flex of discipline is how she actually applies this final touch. Even at the absolute end, when the urge to just finish the painting must be overwhelming, this white highlight is not globbed on heavily. It is applied through controlled, diluted glazes. The fundamental logic of transparency and patience dictates the very last brushstroke just as heavily as the first.
Because the rules of the medium cannot be abandoned simply because the finish line is in sight.
So what does this all mean? Taking a step back to view the entire journey we just unpacked, it is hard to look at painting the same way. We started with a flat, cold, gray sketch. And through the meticulous, calculated methods of Groupiot-Reims, we watched it evolve into a living, radiating organism. It completely shatters the layperson's understanding of what painting actually is. It is not the act of taking colored paste and scrubbing it over white fabric until the fabric disappears.
No, it is an act of construction. You are building a multi-story house composed entirely of colored glass, engineering it specifically to trap, filter, and manipulate ambient light.
If we can distill a broader lesson from the technique of Laura Palacios, it is a profound testament to the power of restraint. A true masterpiece is rarely bullied into existence. It isn't built by overwhelming the canvas with physical force. The true genius lies in the understanding that the layers you refuse to cover up the history you allow to silently shine through are fundamentally responsible for the beauty of the surface.
It flips the concept of creation on its head. What you hold back creates the space for the light to exist.
It really does. It leaves you questioning how we perceive depth in general. So the next time you find yourself wandering through a gallery and you stop dead in your tracks in front of a hyper-realistic, luminous piece of art, I want you to actively fight the urge to just look at the surface.
Because the surface is merely the final destination of the light.
Try to look completely through it. Ask yourself how many invisible layers of history, how many weeks of agonizing patience, and how many sheets of liquid glass are hiding beneath that surface, silently collaborating to trick your brain. And take it a step further when you walk outside and look at the deep blue of the sky or the flush of color in someone's skin. Consider how much of the beauty in our actual physical reality is just an optical illusion created by light bouncing through transparent layers of atmosphere and biology. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking deeper into the construction of the world around you, and we'll catch you next time.